Welcome to the Greens and Blues 14er podcast. This episode, we continue our conversation with Dr. Shaunna Burke of the University of Leeds in the UK. Zach, what are your thoughts on our conversation with Dr. Burke in this episode?
Well, in the lead into the last episode, we talked a little bit about kind of why we were interested in talking to Dr. Burke. And the first episode really, I think, contained kind of more of her academic side and the ethnographic and psychological research she's done on mountaineers, on hikers, on people that are hiking for health reasons. This episode, we're going to look a little bit more at those issues, but we're also going to talk about Shaunna as a person and her own story of mountaineering, climbing Everest about more than 20 years ago for the first time, her work with breast cancer researchers, her work with breast cancer survivors, and then, as she states, she became one of her own subjects as she developed stage 4 metastatic breast cancer in the past few years, and her own struggle with breast cancer, and eventually her triumph of doing the Everest Marathon, and now her preparation to potentially climb Everest again. Yep. After having had breast cancer and chemotherapy and other treatments. I hope the listeners enjoy this story of grit, courage, strength, and character in what follows. It's for, I think, both you and me, I was inspired.
For sure.
Well, with that, here is part 2 of our interview with Dr. Shaunna Burke. I mean, obviously, mountaineers are a particular kind of sensation-seeking or value-oriented activity. Are these observations scalable to other extreme endeavors like ultra runners or people that, free solo when they do climbing? Do they have kind of the same template?
Yeah, I would say when you look at the literature, again, around sensation seeking, but this literature now is quite dated. So this is sort of back to the 1990s. But that research does show that extreme sports, skydiving, free soloing as 2 examples, participants do exhibit that similar sensation seeking profile.
Interesting.
Okay. Dr. Burke, you've mentioned a bit before about group decision-making and how maybe a guide might influence, hey, we can do this, but some in the group maybe are not comfortable with that. You've done research on Everest you call yourself a participant observer where you're with everyone, but you're also conducting research. You've been with cancer survivors on Kilimanjaro. Have you noticed a significant amount of how group dynamics kind of plays itself into the mountaineering sphere? And if you ask a question of the group and the individual, how much influence do you see of the group on the individuals that you've researched? The concept of group dynamics, I think, is fascinating, and especially the way you've conducted your research around that.
Yeah, I suppose as you were talking, I was thinking more from a personal level and sort of in terms of what I've seen around groups. So I'm just trying to shift my thinking to the research. But if I were to start on the personal level, I guess there's a number of things I would say in terms of what I've seen. I think what happens in high altitude is, and particularly when you are in situations where your life could be on the line, you see the best in the human condition and you also see the worst. And so, I've seen, for example, when I was at Camp 1 in 2005, there was an avalanche and it was 10 minutes before I got to Camp 1 and it wiped out the entire camp. Thankfully, there was only a small number of climbers who were there, a few people injured. Thankfully, nobody died. But there were a few climbers who came past who just walked straight through camp and didn't stop to offer to help those injured climbers. And that's really, really difficult to see. But then to the flip side, the rescue was unbelievably incredible when you see people who come together When you see both Westerners, then we saw the Sherpas mounting a rescue operation of people working together to basically carry these injured climbers down through the icefall on their backs, put themselves at risk to get these people off the mountain. You see the best of the human condition where people come together and to really support one another. So I think when we think about climbing on expeditions with other people, I'm always very careful with who I climb with, because my life is in their hands and their life is in my hands. And so that trust really needs to be there with whoever you are climbing with. And I think you can create some incredible social bonds. I mean, some of my closest friends are people that I've shared times in the mountains with, because you are experiencing and living through so much discomfort together, so much hardship, but then also so much pleasure and so much joy that you can really foster some sort of incredible bonds when you're together on the mountains. Yeah, so I think group dynamics can be quite tricky in the mountains, when stress levels are high, you want that your team to be working really well, which is why leadership becomes absolutely crucial in the mountains to make sure that the team is gelling and everybody is working together. So, and I think with research as well, this is why we conduct individual interviews, but sometimes we'll do focus groups, and there's pros and cons to doing each. But when we're in a focus group setting with, say, a group of breast cancer survivors on Kilimanjaro, participants will be influenced by each other. So sometimes what one person shares will then trigger an idea in another person, and then they'll share something entirely different because they were together in that group environment versus being one-on-one. So I think there's times in research when it is beneficial to be in that group and to try to collect your data in that sort of group setting, because I think people do sort of feed off one another.
Is there a sense in which sometimes people end up hiking or climbing when they may not have otherwise because of the group?
That support is absolutely crucial. So I'll tell you, on Kilimanjaro, when I climbed with the group breast cancer survivors, there was one woman in particular who 3/4 of the way up was very, very, very frightened. It was dark. She was struggling breathing, and she was starting to panic, and she wanted to turn around. She said to the guide, I happened to be near them. She said to the guide, right, I'm turning around. I've had enough. I can't go any further. But the guide clearly recognized that this was psychological and it wasn't physical, and sat her down and said, right, okay, let's take some time, let's have some water, have a little bit to eat, and then sort of talk to her and sort of asked her what her fears were. So helped her sort of recognize what it was and encouraged her to keep going. He said, why don't you climb for another 5 minutes? And if you're still not okay, then turn around. And anyway, she got to the summit. And so if it hadn't been for him, for the guide, she would have turned around. So I'm giving you an opposite example, but I'm sure the same does happen as well, where people may place themselves in a dangerous situation because they followed rather than trusting their gut instinct. And I think that is absolutely crucial in the mountains, is that you do listen to, obviously, making informed decisions, but also listening to what is right for you and what your sort of gut instinct is in terms of what you need in that particular moment.
So in your study on Everest, I believe, you talked with a person that went by the name of Jeanette, and she was a mother. She was hiking on Everest. She sort of made a promise, it sounded like, to her kids, hey, I'll be home within 2 weeks or something like that. And the expedition was taking longer than that. And so you talked with her. It sounded like she was beginning to feel feelings of maybe guilt, or I really, really want to be on the mountain. I want to get to the summit. At the same time, I don't want to feel like I'm abandoning my kids or anything like that. Do you find that happens often on the mountain, difficulties in reconciling who they are, maybe even who they are on the mountain versus who they are off the mountain?
It's definitely not unheard of for climbers with families to experience what Jeanette experienced. And what we would call it, there's different ways of looking at it, but one way of looking at it would be that role conflict. And so being a mother and then being a mountaineer, and being a mountaineer then and putting your life at risk what does that then mean to your role of being a mother or whether it's a father? So I think sometimes there can be that role conflict that some people experience, making that going into the mountains, making it again something that needs to be resolved internally, so that it doesn't become something that psychologically becomes a barrier. And so I think for some climbers that they need to make their sort of, I suppose the word might be peace with that, whatever those conflicts are before going to the mountains. Otherwise it could potentially become a barrier. Yeah, I did an interview for my master's thesis with one climber who had climbed Everest 7 times. And he didn't reach the summit 6 times. And on the 7th attempt, he did. And I was quite curious to understand, what were the barriers the first 6 times that he did it that's prevented him. And a couple of times it was due to weather and factors that were outside of his control. But he said a number of times when he went on the mountain, he said he just couldn't stop thinking about his family and what would happen to them if he died on the mountain. And he said, and it paralyzed me psychologically, where I ended up saying, that's it. I can't keep going, because I thought about my children and, where would they be without their dad? I thought about my wife and where would she be? So role conflict is not uncommon. I think it very much it does happen to some climbers, and it's how that's resolved internally.
That's fascinating.
That is.
How did he eventually manage summiting?
So he had shared that very much he ultimately needed to make peace with the fact that he could die. So he made peace with his mortality, which he felt that was something he hadn't quite worked through. And I think that is something, again, that with less experienced mountaineers who haven't sort of worked through that or don't have a lot of experience going into the mountains and taking those risks, it can be paralyzing. It's very important for climbers to be able to manage, those thoughts of let's call them death and dying. And one way they do that is through compartmentalization. It's not that they're in denial. They do recognize and acknowledge, but it is about, okay, well, I am here on the mountain. I need to be in the moment. I need to be present to be able to free me to do what I need to do to get safely to get to the summit.
Did you do any other work with women that have breast cancer that are mountaineering other than Kilimanjaro?
Kilimanjaro was the only study that I did with breast cancer survivors. So I haven't done any in the mountains. I've done other work with cancer survivors, particularly breast. Kilimanjaro was the only study in the mountains. Yeah.
Okay. I may segue to you. So I think this conversation is kind of leading towards maybe asking about your own experience with mortality, Shaunna, and can you share with us kind of where your journey has taken you? We kind of stopped your journey in 2006, and we attended to you as a psychologist for a minute. Can you catch us up on kind of your journey now and where you're at?
Yeah, absolutely. So my current research, so I've been actually working for 17 years with cancer patients and survivors, and looking at the role of physical activity and exercise and how that impacts on a number of different factors, including quality of life, as well as how that helps patients with managing the symptoms and the side effects of cancer treatment. Some of my current work looks at prehabilitation. So how do we prepare patients, both psychologically as well as physically, before undergoing, whether that might be major surgery, whether that might be chemotherapy, radiotherapy, whatever their treatment plan entails. So I've worked quite closely with multidisciplinary care teams, so surgeons, oncologists, nurses, radiographers, to develop interventions and then to test them to see if they can be embedded within the care pathway. And then ironically, it was March of 2024, I was then diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. And so I then was on the other side, which was quite surreal for me. I had a lot of familiarity with the hospital setting as a researcher. I had absolutely none as a patient. So other than maybe the rare antibiotic, I had never been in hospital or having to take any medication. So at the time, I remember my diagnosis being, I was very, very shocked. At the time, I was training to run the Everest Marathon and to climb Leboche East, which is a 6,000 meter peak in the Himalayas. So I was arguably the fittest, I would say, almost in my life. And so my diagnosis just came completely left field, out of nowhere. So I put my head down when I got my diagnosis and just said, right, okay, this is now a new chapter. It's now about undergoing treatment. And so I went through 4.5 months of chemotherapy. And then I had a double mastectomy and lymph node clearance, followed by an operation on my liver. I then had 3 weeks of radiotherapy. And then I found out that I was BRCA2 positive, so carrying the genetic mutation. So I opted to have my ovaries removed. And then I had ablation therapy. And now I'm currently on maintenance therapy. And so throughout all of that, I applied my own research to my own life. So I designed my own prehabilitation plan, which involved, I'm sure you can imagine, it involved exercise. So I would run to my chemo sessions, have my chemo infusion, and then I would walk home. I parked my car 3 miles away from the hospital. I ran to my radiotherapy appointment and I ran back to my car.
So you essentially did a 5K every time you did chemo. You did a 5K too and a 5K walking back.
Goodness.
That's right. And I kept up my exercise throughout as well. But I did that for a number of reasons. So I did that because the latest research actually does show, it's very preliminary, and it's only starting now to gain sort of momentum and traction. But it's starting to show that if you actually do exercise immediately before chemo and radiotherapy, it will actually be more effective. So I did it to ensure that my treatment would be as effective as it could possibly be. So, okay, I was trying to hold on to my athletic identity as well. There are multiple reasons why I was doing it. But for me, it was all about how do I make sure that my treatment is as effective as it can possibly be. And so building that in became critical.
Is there a physiological reason for that? Is it because exercise is immunosuppressive for a short period of time, or is there a reason why that might work like that?
Yeah, so there's a few preliminary sort of explanations as to why it might work. And one of them, it has to do with oxygenation to the actual tumor. And so the exercise helps with the oxygenation to the tumor. And then it also helps with, so if you think of chemotherapy being a systemic drug, so basically it's targeting it goes right through the body, targeting even healthy cells. Yep. But when you do that exercise, if you think about circulation in the body and you think about blood flow, it's really helping with chemotherapy to get it to where it needs to go, for a lack of a more scientific explanation. I'm sort of trying to explain it kind of in layman terms, but those are some of the explanations that have sort of been put forward. And that's not my area of research, so I don't understand it in full depth, but they're saying with radiotherapy as well, that it's to do with the radiotherapy being more effective in terms of how it targets the tumor.
I hate to tell you this, Shaunna, but I think you're kind of burying the lead here. You said when you got your cancer diagnosis that you were training for the Everest Marathon. You were in the best shape of your life. What happened with the Everest Marathon?
Yeah, so I was supposed to run it 2 months after my diagnosis. Clearly, I couldn't because I needed to undergo chemotherapy. And so I delayed my entry to the following year. So it was May of this year, actually, when I went back to the Himalayas. So after my oophorectomy, so after enduring 12 months of chemotherapy, but before my ablation therapy, so it was sort of in between treatments, I went off to the Himalayas and I climbed Leboche East, which is about a 1-day walk before the start of the marathon. So I thought to myself, well, I want to be to be totally honest, I knew I couldn't go back to the Himalayas without climbing a mountain. I couldn't go just to run the marathon. So I actually went predominantly to climb the Boche East, but then I thought, well, where the mountain where you come down, it's almost at the start of the marathon. So I
So
thought,
you
well, if
might as well just do a
Why
marathon,
not? Yeah,
right?
you're there.
You're already there.
exactly, yeah, yeah.
So you
Yeah.
did 12 months of chemotherapy. You had, I didn't count, you had at least one or two of your surgeries before this. And then you went and ran. And what does the Everest Marathon entail?
Yeah, so it was 4.5 months of chemotherapy, but it was 12 months of treatment. So yeah.
Okay.
So the Everest Marathon starts at Everest Base Camp, which is in meters is 5,000, about 5,300 meters. And it's actually a downhill marathon, but it's not entirely downhill. There are sections where there is uphill, but it finishes at 3,300 meters in a village called Namche Bazaar. So it winds through the Khumbu Valley. It's on the same as people would be trekking up to base camp. It's on that same route. So you pass through the Sherpa villages. You've got some of the most incredible, stunning mountainous views all around you. And so you set off, we set off in the morning. I think 7 o'clock was the start time. And 7 hours and 41 minutes later, I crossed the finish line. And I ended up finishing fourth in my category for international women. So I was quite happy because I wasn't quite sure how my body was going to hold up in high altitude. But yeah, I was really pleased with my performance. And if you can imagine, after such a difficult year, it meant even more to me to have completed it. So yeah, really exciting. There was a television crew that followed my story. So there's a documentary that was made. It was a German television station that filmed the start and the end of the run and put a story together. But yeah, it was a fantastic experience. And, there was 32 different countries. So there was, I think, over 200, might even 250 runners from 32 different countries around the world. So it was very international. So you can imagine the energy was quite exciting.
Wow.
Wow. We need to pause for a minute, just like honor that. That's an incredible accomplishment.
Thank you.
And you're planning to do something else now, quite big.
So I've decided that I'm going to go back to the Himalayas again. I think you can see a pattern happening here. I have a passion for the Himalayas. It's just somewhere that I feel very much at home. And I'm going to attempt getting to the summit of Everest 21 years after standing on the summit in 2005. So fingers crossed. I've been doing a lot of training. I'm starting to do training in a high altitude chamber. I'm working with a team at Leeds Beckett University, where we are not only getting myself acclimatized, so a pre-acclimatization plan, but we're also doing some testing to see what my physiological and immune response is in the chamber. So we're going to try to learn as much as possible, because I guess if you can imagine, there's not many people with stage 4 cancer who have done this kind of thing. So we're going to see what happens to cancer markers in low oxygen environments. And we're going to continue the testing on the mountain when I'm there. So my project is called Dying to Climb. I've got a website, dyingtoclimb.com, and we're going to be filming a documentary as well. The Benegas Brothers Productions are the company that I'm working with, and we're going to be conducting research, and I'm going to be using the climb as a platform to raise awareness of stage 4 cancer and to try to inspire other people, and at the same time raise money for cancer charity. So that's really important to me. I managed to raise £13,000 for Macmillan Cancer Support for the marathon, and I'm going to continue to raise money when I go back to Everest this spring.
Wow.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, that's amazing. Have any other women, or men for that matter, ever climbed Everest with stage 4 cancer? Or would you be one of the first?
To my knowledge, there's no other women who have done it, and there is one other man who climbed it with terminal cancer. Other than that, I don't know of anyone else who's done it.
Whoa.
Wow.
So maybe to loop this back a little bit to what we talked about earlier, what mental strategies are you employing? I mean, talk about an obstacle and talk about an occasion for resilience. What have you employed in order to kind of push through? I'm sure some of the anxiety, despair, grief, hurt, whatever you feel when you get diagnosed with cancer, but you're sparkling amidst it all. So what are some of the things that you've done to keep pushing?
Do you know, I think a cancer diagnosis very much involves a number of physical discomforts and, your body, for me in particular, losing to my breasts, both my breasts, your body changes. There are a lot of side effects that come along with alongside the treatment. So I'm not underplaying the physical side to it, but I think a lot of the challenges associated, particularly with a stage 4 diagnosis, is psychological. And I think keeping a mindset that's positive and optimistic, but not unrealistically. You can't be happy every single day. You do have to allow yourself to go through the emotions and to feel emotions and to acknowledge them. But I think being able to reframe my diagnosis has been really, really crucial to my ability to thrive rather than just survive. And so I think in life, any hardship that we face, we can see it as something threatening, or we can see it as something as an opportunity to grow. And I've looked at my diagnosis as something to better my life. I've looked at my life and said, how do I want to change my life as a result of this diagnosis? And so my priorities have changed, and I've made a promise to myself to live fully and to follow my passions. And the mountains are one of my passions. So I'm going to make sure I can do it for as long as I possibly can.
You're an inspiration. You make me, I'm going to go run through a wall right now. Just have one more question. So I crept your Instagram page, as you probably suspecting. And so what role does meditation play in your journey of being present to how you feel, attending to your feelings, but also reframing them kind of the way that you just talked about? Is meditation a part of all that?
It absolutely is. And, before my diagnosis, meditation wasn't part of my life. And it was actually Keely Sherpa, who is a very close friend of mine, who I've known since 2005, because he has a company, High Altitude Dreams, in Nepal, and he set up our expedition, and I've stayed friends with his family since. And he introduced me to something called Vipassana meditation. And so at the end of my marathon, I spent 10 days at a silent retreat meditating in Kathmandu, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done. It was so hard.
Now we need to pause there. You just, you've hiked Everest. You just did the Everest Marathon, and you're like, and I know you're not exaggerating. This was harder. What was so hard? I mean, I kind of know what was hard about it, but I need to hear it. What was so hard about it?
Yeah, I think for me, so I'm more of an introvert than I'm an extrovert. So it was not the fact of being silent for 10 days. For me, it was sitting still and not doing. So I'm very much a doer in my life. And I experienced, for the first 5 days, I experienced so much physical discomfort. Like my back was, because we sat on the floor cross-legged on a cushion, but there's nothing to support your back. And for me, I was in agony for 5 days, 10 hours a day meditating, where, there were breaks in between where you could get up, but it was a short break, and then you'd come back down to meditate, and then another short break and have a bite to eat, and then come back to meditate. And so, but surprisingly, after 5 days, the pain disappeared. But I think, on a number of levels, when you go to places like that, they strip you of everything. So you don't have your mobile phone, you don't have any technology, so you're completely cut off that way. All we had was, bits of clothing and toiletries on us, but everything else we weren't allowed to write or journal or anything. So it really, you were you and your thoughts. You tried to reduce your thoughts through meditation, trying to focus on the present, but it was you and your mind for quite an extended period of time, which in life, I think we're very good at, as human beings, at distracting ourselves. And I know that I was very much that person. And now I've realized the power of meditation in terms of, particularly with my diagnosis, in terms of helping me stay grounded in the present. And I think for a lot of cancer patients, there is that anxiety around the future, the uncertainty of the future. And, what does this mean for me moving forward? Where will I be in 6 months, 1 year, 3 years, whatever that might be? For those who have curable cancer, there's still the fear of a recurrence. I think there's a lot of anxieties associated with the future around cancer. And I think meditation, for me in particular, helps me stay grounded in the present. And it's been a fundamental change for me and massive help.
Wow. Yeah. That's all I got. But I don't have questions because I'm just kind of in awe of you right now. So
Seriously,
I need to chill for a minute.
I have like no questions and a million questions all at the same time because I'm awestruck at. I mean, you mentioned a few television appearances, and in my mind, I'm like, okay, I'm actually talking to a TV star, but that's like the very least of anything that you have encountered in your life. My goodness.
Yeah. Yeah. If I was in Leeds right now, we'd go and have a pint. And
have a good proper natter, as they would say in the
UK. Yeah. What I really think is important that we get out is that, can you give our listeners where to go if they want to find out more with your project? Where do people go if they want to find out about your project or about what you're up to in the coming year?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can actually learn more about my project on dyingtoclimb.com. So that's my website. I'm also on Instagram, so Shaunna Burke, and I'm also on LinkedIn. So those would probably be the best ways. As well, I've got a Just Giving page for fundraising for Macmillan Cancer Support.
And in the next year, we can anticipate there's going to be a documentary about you, but you're also, I think, working on a memoir autobiography. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. So I'm in the process. I'm represented by a literary agent, Cook McDermott. And so I'm in the process of writing a memoir. So that will come out. I don't know when, but in due course, that will come out as well.
Wow. Everything you're accomplishing and thinking about is exceptional. This is all really fascinating.
For sure.
Eric and I are just two humble hikers, dudes that like to go up 13,000 and 14,000 foot peaks, literally half the height of the stuff that you're going up. So for us to talk to someone that's done this stuff and thinks about it is really fascinating. I think that some of the ways that people are motivated to hike Everest or climb Everest are similar to what the reasons why people do peaks in Colorado or Nevada or wherever. Thank you so much, Shaunna, for being here, for chatting with us. This has been really enjoyable. Can't thank you enough.
It's been wonderful, Dr. Burke. Thank you so much for spending time with us, for sharing and being open about your story as well as, the research that you've done. It's been wonderful to talk with you. You're a gem.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on your show. I've really, really enjoyed our conversation, and it's been a great pleasure. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Eric, that was what a really inspirational, amazing story from Dr. Burke. What a great conversation we had with her. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts, and I know you do too, Zach. They say if you can, always be the dumbest person in the room. And whenever you and I talk, I'm already talking to a PhD. I'm already the dumbest person in the room, even more so when I'm talking to two. So that alone was just fascinating. Like we talked about in our first episode, where the focus was kind of more on her research and others' research as well around the kind of the psychology around how and why we try to summit these big mountains. But in this episode, I think Dr. Burke's radiance came through even more, and we were able to see again her more personal side and just see, like you said previously, she's not just kind of living through this and surviving through having had breast cancer and all of the treatments. She's actually, I would say she's thriving through it. Like, she is documenting her attempt at Everest, which is going to be coming up soon after this episode comes out. Again, she's tempting at Everest, but also documenting it. She's bringing awareness. She's raising money. She's not stopping at all. And that whole story is really inspiring, that this is not getting her down. She's actually working through it in a way that is not only going to be helping her, but helping lots of other people in the process too, including you and I. I mean, it was inspiring to talk with her. It was a wonderful conversation. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, man, I wanted to run through a wall after I talked to her. I was like, let's go. If what is holding me back? I do find there's this interesting intersection. There are some people in the research world that make themselves into their own subjects. And I think oftentimes the best researchers are the ones that start with a question that's personal to them. And she started with academic questions that are personal to her, which is, why do I want to do this? Or why do other people want to do roughly the same thing that I want to do, which is climb these big mountains? Yeah. Where's that passion, that spark come from? And as her career has gone on, she found herself doing research with collectives that work with cancer patients and she was researching different psychological modalities and ways to help people go through treatment. And then she became a patient as well. And probably the story that sticks out to me the most is this image of Shaunna Burke, who we could kind of see face or roughly face to face through this visual interface. And this image of her about to go undergo chemotherapy, and she parks her car 3 miles from the hospital
Yeah.
so she can run to get her chemo and then walk back.
Mm-hmm.
And talk about endurance, talk about toughness. There's something to be learned there about motivation and psychology. There's also a lot to be learned there. I think we're beginning to learn more and more about how exercise mediates positive cancer responses
Mm.
and how it may, she was saying, may influence uptake of chemotherapy and improve outcomes. What a story. I'm certainly going to be following her journey here up Everest, hopefully all the way.
For sure.
If she makes it, I'm going to remotely crack open a bottle of something on her behalf. Yeah, I'm always taken aback by people like her or Collards, who we talked about a few weeks ago, a guy like Jerry Roach. These people that are highly motivated. They inspire me to, go out there,
Absolutely.
run that extra mile, lose a little bit of weight. And they're doing stuff a lot harder than anything I'll ever do. So, yeah, I thought it was incredible.
I thought it was wonderful. And thank you, Dr. Burke. Seriously, thank you for spending 2 hours with us, goofballs here stateside, and sharing not only the work that you've done and the work that you've participated in, but your story and your personal journey. Like we've said, it was really inspiring and a lot of fun to chat with you. So we appreciate it.
And I just want to say one thing, Eric, you're never the dumbest guy in the room. So I have negative artistic and musical intelligence, and Eric has positive. Like, I create a void in the universe of artistic knowledge, and
Man, gosh.
Eric actually overcomes that somehow. So
Oh,
I just wanted to put that out there. I think it's really fun to see how we all interact and ask those questions to someone like Dr. Burke and
yeah.
what's interesting about her. We'll keep doing this. I want to have other interesting guests like her. Our niche is always going to be talking about Colorado mountains, but I'd like to keep doing walkabout every once in a while on the
Yeah.
podcast.
For sure. It keeps it interesting and especially when there's people like Dr. Burke who obviously are experts, but also just super personable and really conscientious and wonderful to talk to. That's always going to keep us going each time, I think.
Well, with that, Eric, if people want to reach out to us, if they have comments, anything that they want to add to what we've talked about with Dr. Burke or anything else, how can they get a hold of us?
Yeah, it'd be wonderful to hear from our listeners at greensandbluespodcast@gmail.com or numerous ways you can get a hold of us through our website, greensandbluespodcast.podbean.com. So any of those ways are great ways to get a hold of us. Or if you want to send some sunshine to Norman, Oklahoma, and brighten Zach's day in the midst of some of the winter doldrums that sometimes happen, not necessarily snowy doldrums, but maybe does it get really cloudy in Norman?
Yeah, we get some
Okay.
gray days in the fall and the
Okay.
winter. So, yeah, send me some vitamin D, folks. It'd be nice.
And with that, we'll catch you next time.
See you guys soon.